I am Sean Webb, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hi, this is Zach Poitras, and this is Your Superior Self.
I'm Andy Mant, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hi, this is Sue Jackson, and this is Your Superior Self.
I'm Ginny Sarasvati, and this is Your Superior Self.
What's up, everybody? I'm Aubrey Marcus, and this is Your Superior Self.
What is up, Superior Nation? Welcome back to Your Superior Self. I am Trey Downs, and this is Your Superior Self. Thank you for taking the time to hang out with me. I have Keith Campbell joining the show today. For those who do not know Keith, he is a professor of psychology at the University of Georgia and author of two amazing books on narcissism. You know, I have to be honest. Like, I didn't fully understand narcissism until this episode. Like, I just knew it wasn't a good thing. Like, I've been called a narcissist quite a bit in my life. And I didn't know what that, I just know it's negative. Like, someone who is all about themselves, right? That's basically what I thought it was. And Keith does a great job in this episode explaining that and how it's a part of the ego. It's not the ego entirely. It's just one part of that. And I know you guys already know how I feel about the ego, but still, I think it's great information in this book. The New Science of Narcissism is a tool for those to read and learn more about narcissism and the different types and the different personality traits that are associated with that. And it's well written. I really do like this book. It's an easy read, and each chapter is well researched and has rich scientific details. Everything that a great psychologist would put in a book, he puts in this book. And he's a good dude too. He's like, you can have a conversation with him. So if you want to reach out, you can do that by visiting his website at wkeithcampbell.com. Find out more about his story and his background over there. I mean, he's a good dude. Here's a little part of our conversation.
But I think now, people's identities are being so fractured, where you can have a job, but then your job gets taken. In fact, all the jobs get taken. So you build a brand, and everyone's trying to build a brand, and then that gets taken, and there's so much chaos. Maybe people are starting to realize that this identity stuff isn't quite as stable as it used to be.
Yeah.
So, back in the day, your last name was often your job, Miller or Joyner or Smith or whatever, Minor. I mean, they were their job. The identity was really fixed, and or their location, where they were from or whatever. And now everything is so fragmented. People maybe just go, look, I can't invest this much in my identity because it's just going to be different in a year.
And I could not agree more with that statement. And we also talked about a new revolution in consciousness, which is interesting. And I want to get your take on that. So if you go to yoursuperiorself.com, leave me a message. What are your thoughts on this new awakeness that I think is going on right now? Maybe a lot of people are not in tune with that because of everything that's going on with social media and how everyone is basically, with social media, I think everyone is just hypnotized by it, or just so triggered by everything that they cannot stop participating in it, and it draws them into it. It's like a magnet. It's just amazing to watch, and I see it. Like I can barely go on any social media platform anymore without just seeing people becoming so angry because they feel offended by someone's post. because they attach themselves to a certain party or a certain race or a certain idea, when everything that we are, I mean, they're all labels. Like I 100% believe that what I am is not Trey Downs or a white guy. You know, like that source inside of me is just so much bigger, so much higher in consciousness, so much purer in energy. Like these are all just things that we created in a language to identify what we are. What you are is something so much more powerful than what you believe. Your name is just a label, and a lot of people attach a lot of emotion and a lot of importance behind that, because they think that the word, their name, represents who they are, and that's so limited, because we are truly more than that, so much more than that. And I don't usually do this. I don't at all, but I got a notification of like a comment that was made on the YouTube channel about being connected with nature, like plants. Like I think I was talking to I think it was the episode we're all connected with Scott, and someone was furious that I guess we talked about being connected to the plants and in nature, and they basically said, well, how can we be connected? We're human beings, and that's not possible. We're living things. How are we connected? We're separate, we're individual. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, and I chalk it up to someone not knowing. I mean, we are all connected. What do you think happens when we pass away? Like, your body deteriorates. It goes back to dust, which goes back into, the earth. We're all connected. We're connected through this thing called consciousness. Like, consciousness does not derive from our minds. It's outside of ourselves. I mean, there's a study that, and I always say this study, it's crazy. There's a microtubule study that came out of like Japan, where they found out that the microtubules in our brains, that the outside of the neurons, vibrate with the quantum field. They vibrate together. So maybe that could be consciousness. I don't know. We don't know what consciousness is. And that's what we talk about a little bit in this episode. The revolution of consciousness, like finding out more about that. That is the last frontier for me. Like, that is the more that I try to study about it. But of course, we're not all going to know about it. We don't know about consciousness and where it comes from. We know it comes from, while we believe it comes from a source higher than ourselves, but do we really know? But finding out about that's such, but we are all connected. Look at the plants, the trees. I mean, we are all connected through consciousness, and it's hard for people to understand that. Yeah, and that's my rant. I'm sorry, but I had to, I don't usually rant this long, but it's that important. And I want to hear your thoughts. And a lot of you are going to say, oh, this is new age. This is new age. That's fine. Like, okay, that's cool. Like, I'll be new age. I'm fine with that. Like 100%. I am cool with that. New age. Put that label on top of me. Put it in my Facebook profile. New age. But again, it's just a label. That is not me. All right. So enough. I'm sorry. It is raining out here. I have not gone for my run. It is my rest day, and my body is definitely crying out for some endorphins, and I'm just sipping my first cup of coffee. You guys have been there. But I want to say thank you to Keith Campbell for coming on the show. I want to say thank you to Beth Grossman for introducing us. She is an amazing person. And I can't mention Beth without mentioning Sarah Scarlett. These two ladies really put in the work and helped me get a lot of my guests, and they're just amazing to work with, and they're beautiful people and beautiful souls, and I just want to give them both a shout out now and just say thank you for all that you do for this podcast, and thank you for all that you do for me. You guys are amazing. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Dr. Keith Campbell.
Hi, I'm Keith Campbell, and this is Your Superior Self.
Dr. Campbell, what's going on, my friend? How are you?
Hey, pretty good. Good to be on your show.
Yeah, man. This is going to be excellent because your book that I have in front of me, The Uncorrected Proof. Thank you, by the way. Your PR lady, Beth, shout out to her. She's amazing. She got me this copy, and I read it cover to cover, and I was really impressed, man. You did your research. You did an excellent job.
Beth is awesome. I will happily give her a shout out.
And before I forget, the book is called The New Science of Narcissism. And let me just tell you, I've been called a narcissist before. It's not, I don't think it's, positive, right? Like, is it a positive, like, to call somebody a narcissist?
When most people use the term, it's pejorative. So it's generally not something you want to be called. In the research, it's a little more of a mixed bag. So being narcissistic has benefits and costs, just like a lot of things. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but the label is one we think of that's a little more negative.
Mm-hmm. Well, can you explain, why'd you write this book? How did you get into narcissism? Why did you narrow it down to that niche?
Well, I started back in graduate school. It's been probably 25 plus years doing this. And back in the day, there's this interest in the self. So we as people, we tend to inflate ourselves. So if I ask my class, how attractive are you compared to everyone else? People, I'm a 6 or 7. People aren't, I'm not a 10, but most people overestimate. And if I say, you failed at your test, how come? People don't say I'm an idiot. They say, well, it wasn't fair. I didn't try hard. So we have these distortions or biases that we all do to some extent. And when I got into the literature, I started realizing there's some people do it more than others. Some people are just sort of full of themselves, and some people are actually a little more humble. And narcissism was a way of looking at that. So it started out as a pretty basic research question. And also I was interested in Buddhism and the non-self and sort of that more spiritual idea of self-transcendence. And it's very hard to study scientifically. But when you study that, the sort of the over-the-top, arrogant, full of itself, entertaining self, the ego, it's really easy to see. It's really easy to study. So it's kind of an interesting, easy thing to do research on. Yeah. Anyway, that's how it started.
Yeah, because when I hear narcissism, the first thing I think of is ego, right? Like that's what I think of. Because I think, obviously I think of a negative, right, when I hear narcissism, but you break it down. Like there's like 2 types, right? Like the grandiose and what's the other one? Vulnerable or something?
Vulnerable.
Like so what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, there's 2 different forms, and there's a different history here. And so what narcissism shares across forms is this sort of sense of entitlement. I deserve special treatment. Maybe I'm better than other people. Maybe I'm a little bit callous to other needs. And it's not that I lack empathy completely. I'm incapable of empathy, but I just don't think about other people first thing. That might come second. So that's sort of core. And if you take somebody with those traits and you make them really driven and extroverted and sort of charming and charismatic, what you get is what we call somebody who's grandiose, a narcissist, or has high grandiose narcissism. So you think of Tony Stark and Iron Man. Trump has a lot of these grandiose features. A lot of political leaders do. A lot of people we have bad relationships with or have these sort of grandiose features. So this grandiose narcissism is one we run into a lot in the workplace and leadership and, in preachers, you get grandiose narcissism there. And these folks end up doing pretty well in life, and they're interesting. Another group of people have these same self-important traits. They think, I matter a lot. But they're also a little insecure. They have low self-esteem. They're scared to go out and do anything. So they tend to sit at home, get depressed because the world isn't giving them the accolades they deserve. And these we often label as vulnerable narcissists because they're vulnerable to threat. They're somewhat brittle. Their self-esteem is fragile. So it's and these folks end up going into therapy because of their depression and their anxiety and their inability to really function as well. So what happened over time is therapists kept seeing narcissists who were vulnerable, and people in the workplace or dating kept seeing narcissists who are grandiose. And they used the same term to describe both people. And then they came up with this theory that, well, these people you see that are really grandiose and driven and in your face, deep down inside, they're really fragile and brittle. They're kind of weak inside. And that doesn't seem to be the case at all. It seems to be more that there's some folks that are just driven, grandiose, out there in your face narcissists, more self-expressive, agentic. And there's some that are more vulnerable. They're more hidden or shy. Sometimes we call them like living in your mom's basement narcissists, who are more prone to depression, and they struggle a little more. And both forms have benefits and trade-offs, but the grandiose form is generally more positive. The vulnerable form is generally more negative for people.
I feel like narcissism and the ego, right? Like I feel like it's obviously something that, you know, you say driven people have, but I also feel like it's like genetic, right? Like I feel like we do it because of like our survival needs, right? Like to be the leader, to be the alpha. Like I feel like these are traits that we've developed over time that we needed to survive, to be that alpha male or alpha female or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So when Freud first started talking about narcissism, he talked about it as this survival instinct, to a sense, this drive to survive. And it is something you see with leadership. It's status seeking, dominance seeking. As you say, with narcissism, you're looking for sex status and stuff. And you can put those in fancy words, sexual conquest and, you know, power, fame, adulation, attention, admiration, stuff, some, you know, fancy stuff, material goods, whatever. So that's what narcissists seek. And so there's clearly reasons we do that. People who seek those things tend to be successful. Watch Game of Thrones. And that alpha idea is real too. I mean, you see that across the animal kingdom, though. Anyway, being an alpha male has a lot of trade-offs. And humans, it doesn't work quite the same as it does with a lot of other species.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, well, I mean, our brains, right? Like that's just, I don't know, man. Like since I've been learning about the cortex and, you know, animals and the chemical reactions that we have in our brains when, you know, we go after that dopamine, that serotonin, that all of that, endorphins, the cortisol, like just, you know, the more that I learn more stuff about that, like the more that we're just programmed. And I don't know, like everything's a reaction to things, right? A chemical reaction in your brain.
Yeah, I think so if you think about it, so when I hear how you're framing it, makes a lot of sense with narcissism. So you think about a couple real basic drives in humans, and some people are wired for what we call approach goals. They want to succeed. They've got high dopamine. When they win, they feel good. They're competitive. They're driven. They get excited. And those folks are sort of like the gas pedal. And then there's this other system, which is more linked to serotonin, and GABA has to do with anxiety, and it's more of a avoidance system. So it has to do with the brakes. So it's fearfulness, it's avoiding threats. And people who are more avoidance oriented, they feel best when they're at peace, when they feel safe. That's what they want. And we're all built to have some avoidance or some approach. And we have it's just like a car has a gas pedal and a brake. We have a lot of this approach motivation, avoidance motivation. Generally, people in our culture who are more approach oriented are happier and do better. And narcissism, grandiose narcissism, is associated with approach orientation. Vulnerable narcissism is associated with this avoidance motivation. But if you think about it, you can have a lot of drive and a lot of ambition, a lot of competition, but you don't have to have that second step where you're like, God, Keith, you not only are driven and competitive, but you are awesomely driven and competitive and kind of hot. So that second order step of like, hey, I want to get a bunch of people around and take a picture of me being this competitive. So you have the ability to be very agentic and driven and competitive, but not be that narcissistic, if that makes sense.
No, it
you
makes
can have the
total
drive
sense.
without that much ego. And in fact, sometimes in, you know, things like team sports or sort of group work you're doing with other really high intense people, if you have a big ego, other people are going to shut you down. You know, so you're playing on a team and you start taking credit for the football team's success, and next time you play, the front line's going to let somebody in.
Yeah.
You know, people have a way of sort of, you know, they'll knock you down if you get too big for your, you know, if your head gets too big.
Especially down there at the University of Georgia, those
Oh,
Bulldogs.
Yeah. I hope we're playing. I hope we're playing.
Well, you're in SEC, so I'm pretty sure you guys are playing.
They want you, I tell you.
Football or death.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty close.
Oh, man. So on a scale of like 1 to 10, what do you think you are? I mean, you know, as far as looks.
Not 7, man. What do you think?
7. That's what I just think it's crazy, man. I just think, you know, you talk about narcissism and it's perfect. I mean, it's perfect for the times that we're living in. I mean, you think about social media, Instagram and Facebook, all the filters that we have, like narcissism to the times 10. Like it's insane.
It is, you know, if you're wired or designed to have shallow relationships with lots of people that are based on things like looks, social media is perfect for it, and narcissism is perfect for it. So when we look at the research, you find people who are narcissistic just have more following on social media. They have more Instagram or Twitter. Most everything we've looked at, you know, they're more extroverted. They just have these bigger social networks.
Yeah. Do you think that social media breeds more narcissism? Like, do you feel, so is it more genetic? Like, is it a condition that we grow up with? Is it something that we're programmed with? Like, or is it like social media? Is it potentially feeding, you know, the right ingredients to produce more narcissism?
So first of all, we have a lot of twins out there where you look at how twins and you look at how parent, you know, you measure narcissism in parents and you look at the kids and you do this across groups, and you find narcissism, like most personality traits, is pretty genetic, or at least pretty heritable. Meaning it's about half of it, maybe a little more, is something we inherit from our family. So we're kind of wired, we're predisposed maybe one way or the other. Upbringing makes a difference. Culture makes a difference. Social media, as far as we can tell in the research, maybe reinforces narcissism. So people who are narcissistic will use social media, and that will help reinforce it. It's how we do a lot of things. So if I want to think I'm awesome, I go out there and get attention and have people tell me I'm awesome, and that reinforces it. So social media seems to reinforce narcissism, but it doesn't seem to inflate it in people. So if I gave just an average person, you know, an Instagram account, their narcissism doesn't seem to go up over time. It just seems to maintain it in some way. But the research is pretty thin. I wish we knew more, and we're just not.
I would love to see like the research numbers on like the data collection on like the younger generation, especially like the 10 to 12-year-olds right now, just with their abilities to download like TikTok or Snapchat or anything like that, and just see over the, you know, the next 5 years, like what are the numbers compared to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And what's really interesting though is they've had this sort of generational change in social media. So what we saw back in the, you know, the Paris Hilton, Kim Kardashian primetime days, you know, 06, 07, people were using Instagram, and it was very narcissistic. People were using it to get a lot of attention. And things a few years later started to change, where I think a lot of the younger kids, it was so stressful to go online. It's like, you know, being a kid now is a bit like being a celebrity. So in the old days, you're a kid, no one knew who you were. It just didn't matter. You just ran around. No one would know who you were unless you maybe did something in the paper once. You were an Eagle Scout or something, you know, whatever. You did something. but no one would ever know your name or see your picture except the yearbook. And now these kids are on social media all the time. And what you end up with is some of the diseases of celebrity. And narcissism might be one of those, or attention seeking, but you also get depression. You get this over focus on the self. People become really self-conscious. They get, so we saw plastic surgery rates going up because people wanted to look good in selfies. And I mean, you have these ads, you get a plastic surgeon, like, improve yourself, you get this procedure. Mm-hmm. So you have those trends, and I think it made some people change. So they started moving to Snapchat, where it's a little less formal, and then TikTok, where it's a little less formal, it's a little less judgmental. It didn't have the glory of, Instagram. So there's been some migration away from some of that more ego-focused social media, I think. It's hard to know. These things change so quickly.
Yeah, we're getting old, man. I'm losing track.
Fast getting old.
TikTok. I don't know, man. My nieces were on it, and like they were talking about it one day, like TikTok. I was like, what the hell is TikTok? Like, I don't know. I just got used to Instagram. Now they're coming out with TikTok or Snapchat. I'm like, what is going to be next? It's going to be insane. But the filters on it are incredible. Like, the fact that you see people on Facebook and the profile pictures are like this glamorous, like glittery, sparkle the eye, obviously a filter. Like, it's scary, man. I mean, it gives these kids this complex early on that they have to be this certain image, and it's sad. And like, as a parent, like, and there's a section in here that I really, really enjoyed about narcissism and parenthood. Like, what are some, the tips that you can tell the audience, as far as, not, teaching your kids as far as being a narcissist?
Yeah, I think that's something people ask a lot, and I struggle with. I mean, everyone struggles with. And the first thing, of course, is, if you're trying to be a loving person yourself, you at least be a decent role model. It's, if you're going to be arrogant and try to expect any more from your kids, just like you're home drinking and you're like, where'd you learn that, son? It's like those old ads. I learned my narcissism from you, Dad. That would be a joke somehow. I can turn that into something. But the phrase I've used is CPR, because people remember that, but it helps to think about the different techniques or strategies we have for minimizing narcissism. And the first is compassion, which is basically just showing love or caring for anything, for your kids, for animals, for other people, just being a decent human being. And the reason for compassion is that, having an ego is fine if you're not a bad person. Most people will tolerate you being a little bit arrogant and a little bit full of yourself, as long as you're sort of caring and you're willing to do something for other people. It's a buffer against narcissism. So compassion is a big one. The next one is one people don't think about very often, so I think it's really important, but it's passion. So when you do things you love doing, I go surfing or fishing or whatever, sports, whatever you're into, when you're passionate about it, when you love it, your ego doesn't get involved as much. You're just stoked. So you share your enthusiasm for what you do, rather than sharing your glory, rather than telling people what a legend you were. You tell them how excited you were. So I think that's a really nice way you can be super engaged, but minimize your ego to some point. And sometimes they talk about flow states. I don't know people about that, but getting in those flow states minimizes narcissism.
Let's not even start that flow.
Yeah, I know, but I think I try to think about, the obvious way is people are like, don't be so full of yourself. Well, that's hard to do, but these other things you can do that are sort of buffers for it. The final one, the R, is for responsibility taking, responsibility. And that's a big one. In a lot of the research with narcissism, you see this inability or unwillingness to take responsibility for screw ups. Or on the opposite, this sort of desire to steal credit from people, be a credit hog, or,
I
steal
hate
stuff
that.
from your. Right, of course you do, because everyone hates it. Because we're kind of wired to hate people stealing our credit. We like fair play.
No, right?
And
it's the narcissist in me that hates
training yourself. Well, no, I mean, nobody wants, people want people to be fair. You know, you can be a little unfair, but if you're stealing credit from people, they don't like you. They want you to be fair.
You said fair, right? Like, so that like,
yeah.
you don't mean to cut you off, but there was another point in the book. What was it? The tragedy of something. It was like the field.
Oh, the tragedy of the commons.
Yes.
Tragedy
right.
of the commons.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the label tracks from grazing on a common ground, like Boston Commons. It used to be shared for grazing sheep or cattle. And so what happens in commons is everybody takes a little bit, they graze, you graze your 10 sheep and that's all. And everybody does it. Every year the grass comes back. It's great. You can do it forever. But what happens is people start making a selfish choice for themselves. So they go, you know what, I'm going to graze 12 sheep. I'm going to graze 15 sheep. Pretty soon the grass doesn't come back. So then the next people go, wow, the grass isn't so good. People are cheating. I'm going to cheat too. And then the next person cheats. And pretty soon the grass all gets eaten and the whole thing gets destroyed. You see this with fisheries a lot. People will start fishing a certain species of fish. They'll overfish it, and they'll exploit it very quickly. So what happens in these commons dilemmas, and these are all over social behavior, is that people who are narcissistic actually do well in a sense, because they're willing to go in there and just take it first. They'll exploit the resource first. They'll take advantage of people first. They'll come out of it better than others, but they end up destroying the world. I'm thinking of what's a good example of this that doesn't involve resources.
I mean, as an entrepreneur, it's like, as an entrepreneur, I mean, let's just admit it, as an entrepreneur that we are narcissists. I mean, we want to get in there and take it all, right? I mean, that's essentially the name of the game, own the market, right? Like Comcast, when it first came out, it was like, basically a monopoly. It wasn't until like Verizon came around with its, I don't know, like cable's terrible, but.
But then if you imagine a business ecosystem, whatever the business you're in is, education, publishing, I don't know, finance, building, whatever, there's an ecosystem and you want to go in there and you want to win, but if you destroy the whole ecosystem, everyone loses. So it's kind of a challenge in that way where people end up being frenemies in a lot of cases. So the airline industry all compete with each other, but they all want the airline system to grow. So they can't kill each other completely. So they're cooperating half the time and competing half the time. Podcaster, I don't know the industry, but I assume on one hand, you're kind of working to build the podcast industry and make it work better for people and make the access better and the visibility better. And so you're working with other podcasters to raise the industry, but then at the same time, you're competing each other for a share. And so you're trying to grow the pie and then you're fighting over the pie. If that makes, at the same time, you're like growing the pie and fighting the pie.
It's like football too, right? Recruiting in football.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so the challenge is the challenge with narcissism is can you go to that point where you're kind of going in there and being aggressive and making it happen, because you got to make it happen. You can't sit back, but you're not exploiting people, destroying the system, being unfair, being unethical, kind of killing the golden goose, if that makes sense. So there's a balance there. But yeah, entrepreneurs are sort of narcissistic. I mean, it correlates. Entrepreneurship and narcissism correlate, because you have to have some. Yeah, there's a confidence.
Yeah, there's a scale there, right? You got the entrepreneurs that are all in, all about me, and you got the entrepreneurs that are kind of like, obviously, the social responsibility kicks in, right? Like they're very conscious about, the natural resources that you talked about. And then you got the entrepreneurs that are like, I don't care if I burn down a forest, I want to make $1. You know what I mean? It's just, it's crazy. But like, there's another section in this book that I really
and then you get people
there's another section in this book that I liked about, how to deal with that, right? Like a great way to, I mean, obviously you said be aware to that, right? Like to admit that you're a narcissist, but the one way of dealing with that really is like mindfulness, right? Like kind of being aware of that trait that you have and being mindful when you're in conversations and not reacting to the emotional response to things.
Yeah, very much. People, when you deal with narcissism, there's also a disorder, a clinical disorder, which is this extreme kind of inflexible form of narcissism. So when people talk about narcissism, they're often thinking it's this unchangeable, scary, fixed personality. But really, you find a range of people, and lots of people at this end, whether, I'm narcissistic, I'm aware my ego leads me to have problems. It messes up my relationships. I wish I could be more present for my kids, my wife, my husband. And so one of the ways you can handle this is just really take some awareness of what you're doing, practice some mindfulness, and just watch yourself and how you're changing conversations with people, how you're engaging with people. I mean, I can give an example of myself. I'm super extroverted. And I start talking to people, I'll turn the conversation to whatever end I want immediately. My ego just goes in there and it just happens. And I just went around a conference and I realized I didn't listen to anyone. All I was doing was shooting my mouth off the whole time. And that was one of those moments where I'm like, well, I mean, that's the first step, right? You go, oh my God,
you need to make 10 steps of the narcissist.
But the problem is when I watch myself doing it, you get reinforced for it. Sometimes people are shy. They want somebody to be the life of the party. They want somebody to step up. So there's reasons it happens. But I think that awareness, it's a practice, like a lot of things, just practice.
It is practice. I mean, it's hard because like a lot of things are connected to your self map, everything. Was there a study or something like that where they had these people hooked up to some like this machine where it would give you like electrical shocks, and they would shock you and they would measure like the obviously the reactions that you were having in your body, and then they brought in a stranger and they told you that they were going to have a shock and that you didn't care, but when they brought in somebody that was your relative or somebody who was very close to you and said we're going to shock them, you had they were measuring your body as well, and you had the same exact reaction as you did when you got shocked or something like that, because like that you put things on your self map that you react to, that your brain attaches the self to.
Yes, the self, the ego, the self, it expands, it extends to all sorts of things. So it extends to our relationships. So, our kids, obviously, our spouses, our friends become part of ourselves. What they say good to us is great. When they hate us, it's terrible. When they get hurt, we feel hurt. It extends to our possessions. It extends to our cars, our clothes, our watches. This is all marketing. It's just moving your ego into products.
Yeah,
and we get a lot of status from stuff, and so it escapes into that way. It seeps into our identity, our how you identify it in your profession, your career. People get hung up on that so much. I'm a professor, I'm a writer, I'm a podcaster, I'm a worker, whatever it is. That identity we get so saturated with that when we lose that, we want to die. So our ego is a very powerful thing. It goes everywhere, and it's hard to get away from it.
Can you kill the ego? Can you get rid of it? Serious.
So, yeah, no, I'm taking you 100% seriously. And I'm going to answer it in a serious way, but I'm just going to define ego because we're talking about narcissism.
Yeah.
Narcissism, just to be clear, is sort of one example of ego. That's one way of being egotistical, and it's kind of an easy one to see. But you can be really egotistical because you're like, I'm the best friend, or I always fit in. Your ego can be all sorts of things. So when I talk about ego dissolution, it's not just narcissism. But there's different studies on either self-transcendence or ego death or ego dissolution or mystical experience. And people report that sort of losing a sense of self. Sometimes they do in flow states. So that there are different times people will report this. The psychedelic work is the obvious one where you can induce these mystical experiences pretty easily, I think. But people report it in other ways as well. So there's some research on it, but it's just hard to do because it's hard to bring people in the lab and get rid of their ego. It doesn't happen to people very often. it's not very often if you say, hey, have you ever just felt like you lost your ego? People might say, yeah, I was in the the Caribbean. It was spring break, and I was on a paddleboard in the middle of nowhere at sunset, and everything went away. I mean, it doesn't happen every day,
Yeah, and I think people are just
so it's hard to capture in a lab.
And I think people are just now becoming aware of the ego. I think it's people are being, I don't know. I just think there's this awakeness going around that people are kind of like, oh, that's what that is. That's ego. Okay. Well, then I didn't know that I was not the ego. Like I identified as the body, as the ego, as that being me. And I realized, reading some, what is his name? Eckhart Tolle and, spiritual texts that, the ego is for real. Like it makes you think that that is you. And, I don't believe that that's me at all. I don't identify my being as that. I think it's, emotionally driven 100%. I mean, the mind is a powerful thing. It is something that, talks shit to me all day, every day, you're not good enough. You're not doing the right things. You're not doing this the correct way. And I think the ego, like I wouldn't say try and kill that, but I mean, you got to live with the ego. I don't believe that you can kill it. I think you can live with it. And there's techniques like you talk about in the book, trying to reduce that narcissism, which is this one aspect of the ego. But I think if you get into these practices of mindfulness and meditation and, flow states and exercise, and running for me has been a game changer for that. And just doing daily routines that help you deal with narcissism. I think, you'll start realizing that, you're not going to be able to get rid of it. You're just going to have to, do things to kind of mitigate it.
Yeah. I mean, you're bringing up a lot of stuff. I think something you're saying that's really interesting. Two things. One, the last thing that is the idea of a practice. And I'm a yogi. I do yoga all the time. I don't know if it's helped, but after 10 years, at least I sit on the mat and I go, oh my God, I'm thinking again. I can't stop my damn mind. At least I'm familiar with it. And I usually try to quiet my mind for 10 or 20 an hour. So I think that practice is really important, that idea of just discipline over time. And, all the traditions teach that. There's no real short, quick fix for anything. The second question is something I hadn't really thought of because, I just do this for a living. I think about this stuff all the time and I kind of but I think now, people's identities are being so fractured, where you can have a job, but then your job gets taken. In fact, all the jobs get taken. So you build a brand and everyone's trying to build a brand, and then that gets taken, and there's so much chaos. Maybe people are starting to realize that this identity stuff isn't quite as stable as it used to be.
Yeah.
So, back in the day, your last name was often your job, Miller or Joyner or Smith or whatever, Minor. I mean, they were their job. The identity was really fixed, and or their location, where they were from or whatever. And now everything is so fragmented. People maybe just go, look, I can't invest this much in my identity because it's just going to be different in a year. Hell, I won't even know how to share my identity here. I don't know. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I think it is interesting. I think that, I think we're just seeing in the way that the world is now, and the way that the world is awakening to a lot of things that are going on. I just think the old way is dying. And, the people that I have conversations with who are a little bit more, in the mystical texts, like they'll talk about this awakening to the true self and the difference between the true self and the small self. And, we had an early discussion about, I think you said you did some research with some what is it? Plant-based medicines, and experience. I don't know if did you say you experienced it, or you're just doing research?
I have a student who was, it's a little bit of a story, but I have a student who was interested in studying ayahuasca, shamanic ayahuasca. And so, as usual, I kind of had a buddy who was a shaman that I'm very extroverted. I just ended up meeting a lot of random people, and I met this guy in yoga, and he kind of appears out of the jungle every once in a while. And so we started doing research at some of these centers down there. And so I was just doing this just to help my student out. It's really interesting, just curious stuff. I mean, I come out of the William James tradition. I'm always interested in consciousness. And so I did that. But then at the same time, I had this buddy of mine kind of work me through how plant medicine works. So he kind of had me do some combo and do some other ceremonies with some visionary stuff. And it's pretty powerful.
Did it change? Like, so you're a guy, you're a man of science. Like, you're a man of, you have your Ph.D. in psychology.
Yeah.
You teach at a major university. Did it change? I mean, you said it's pretty powerful. Like, so I'm assuming you had some pretty powerful spiritual encounters.
Yeah. So here's the thing with, I'm a science dude. I have a PhD, I do science, I do research, I do statistics. I mean, it's not like that. I love this stuff. Back in the day, about 100 years ago, when we started studying the self, we talked about something called the spiritual self, this idea of a unified self. You called it in here maybe a true self, or, you had a Carl Jung called it the capital S self, and other people had different terms for it, but you're right. There's this idea that there's this spiritual state of transcendence or wholeness or a mystical state. And this was maybe associated with something like the soul. And so people were talked about this, but they couldn't really do any research on it. So the research kind of just went away and the behaviorists took over. So we have 100 years of research on what we could see, which is, marketing and relationships and self-esteem. We know we have hundreds and hundreds of studies of self-esteem. We have very few studies on self-transcendence. And so the research is slow, and there's just stuff out there we don't understand. And I've seen stuff, working in these traditions that I don't understand. I mean, our models don't explain it. You basically have to start using a different model. You have to use a Jungian model or a model from Hinduism, from the Upanishads, maybe, or use some different models to understand consciousness at that level. Because our Western models our models aren't very good. We just aren't very good at it.
Yeah, I mean, Johns Hopkins has invested a ton of money in psychedelics. I'm excited to see what they do with their research. Yeah, you should definitely look into. Look into Robert Monroe, because he has different levels of consciousness and beliefs. That I'm telling you right now, it's insane.
We're teed up. We're going to have a consciousness revolution in the next couple of years. It's already starting, and I think it's going to be. I'm not going to predict anything, but I think it's going to be really interesting.
I can't wait for nonverbal communication, man.
They're going to do, I mean, that's that kind of stuff. I bet they can, I've been in studies where they allow you to spell by thinking. You can kind of just spell with your mind. This is something they do with people who are shut in, with Lou Gehrig's or something. And they can use basic brain responses to have you spell. It's very easy to do. The stuff they're going to be able to do is going to be unbelievable. But it doesn't really solve the problem of consciousness.
No. It's but that's what I love about consciousness, man. Like it's just it's like the new front, however you call it, the new frontier, whatever you want to call it, like the last frontier. It's like something that we just don't know about, and anybody can be correct. I mean, we just don't know. I mean, how can you? No,
like the Western science is just awful. I apologize as part of the community, but it's just really poor. Templeton's funding some work now. People are trying to look at it, but it's very basic. And and the model they have, if you look at the guys in Silicon Valley, is that, well, we're going to make a powerful enough computer, and if we can get the things talking fast enough, we're going to be able to create consciousness. We're going to be able to link systems quickly enough, and we're able to create a conscious system. I mean, that's the singularity idea, at least in part. And I don't know if that's going to happen, but we're going to find out soon enough.
We'll find out.
I mean, it's either going to be Frankenstein or it's going to be my new best friend. I mean, this is pretty smart people. I don't know what's going to happen.
Oh man, I don't know, man. I'm excited to learn.
But
now.
I think they're mysteries. I think there are mysteries, and I think our understanding is a fraction of where it will be. And that makes me excited.
Sure.
You know, nothing worse than getting old thinking you figured it out.
I know. And then there's a theory about how, like, where you're at in your life and you think you got it all figured out. It's some kind of theory, but it happens to me all the time. Like, I'm like, oh man, I've reached this point in my life and I'm like, I'm finally got it figured out. And then like I'll read something that leads me down this next rabbit hole. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know nothing. Like, it's insane.
Like I said, I do this for a living. I've been doing it a long time. And I used to think every once in a while I thought I had it figured out. Now I just figure I got 80% right and 20% is going to trip me up. And that's the best I can do.
I'm just trying to be, man. I'm just trying to be in the moment and like just enjoy it and be 100% here instead of the ego telling me, you know, the past and the future, like, you know, spreading more fear than you know, I already have mentally.
Why did you do that?
Yeah. Like,
why did you do what you did? Why are you going to do what you do?
You're such a
why do you suck? And you're such a
narcissist bastard. Narcissistic bastard.
It's just hard. I mean, it's ego. People are just running around in their heads all the time, and we think people care about us. We think everyone's thinking about us, but everybody's thinking about themselves.
No.
It's like we're all in this box thinking about ourselves, thinking everybody's thinking about us, but nobody cares about us.
No, man. Like there was this,
you know.
There was this freaking experiment. They had these guys come into this room and they were just talking like you and I are just having a conversation, and they had numbers up on the wall, and they just said, "Hey, look, let's crank the numbers up on the wall and let this guy feel like people really like listening to him." So they crank it up, and he, you know, after the interview, he's like, "Yeah, I feel good. Like my self-worth is great." And they put the other guy in there, and he just started talking, you know, about nothing, you know, whatever they wanted to talk about. He's like, "All right, lower those numbers," and they lower the numbers down, and the guy comes out feeling like shit because he actually he thought that people were. That those numbers directly correlate with what his self-worth, like what he was talking about. Nobody wanted to listen to him. And it's just like Facebook with the likes and Instagram with the likes. Like if you don't get 100 likes, doesn't mean it's not art. It just means that, you know, nobody gives a shit, you know? It's crazy.
It is. That kind of evaluation is so powerful socially and psychologically to be evaluated by people. It's so hard. And you know, people, you know, they want to be famous and then they just get beaten to crap and it's horrible. I mean, this is really hard. We're not wired for this stuff. I mean, it is just psychologically a mess.
It is a mess. But yeah, this has been awesome. I love having this chat with you. How can people connect with you?
Website is wkeithcampbell.com. We put up a site, narcissismlab.com, that has a bunch of narcissism tests on there if anybody wants to try it out, if you're curious.
I'm a narcissist, by the way.
Yeah, that's about it.
I'm a grandiose.
It's okay.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Somebody asked me that, and I said, I want the great grandkids to look at my portrait and say, I don't know who that guy was, but he paid for the weed. So that was pretty much the best idea I had. I want to disappear, but leave joy on the face of my progeny, knowing that I did my best for him. And I'm gone.
Awesome. I've never gotten that response. That might be the most epic response that I've ever received on this show. Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell, for joining the show. This has been amazing, man.
Oh, thanks for having me. That was really fun.
I want to say thank you to Keith for coming on the show. I want to say thank you to you, the listener, for hanging out with me today. If you want to follow me on social media, you can do that. TDowns80 on Instagram and at Downs Trey for Twitter. Check me out on Facebook. I have a little Your Superior Self fan page over there. You can like and follow. You can also Check me out at yoursuperiorself.com. Leave me a message. Let me know what you guys are up to. Want to hear your thoughts on the episode and any future guests that you may want to listen to. All right, guys. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you later.